Right. Well, I think we'll get rolling. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Ken Delata. I'm the county conservationist here in Oconto County. We kind of started this program, if you were with us, 2 years ago with when we did the Meet Your Scientist. Uh, been a long 2 years, but we got your data pretty much collected and stuff, and getting to Ryan's got the summary here for you, and we're going to be starting to write the plan. So a few things before we get started, I just wanted to go through with you. If you remember on Zoom, or those that are not familiar with it, on the bottom of your screen, you'll have a little microphone. Ask that you stay muted unless you're asking a question or something, so we don't have background noise. Then if you go across there, you can see the number of participants, and the next one is a question and answer. Feel free to go in there at any time and type your questions in there and stuff, or you can wait until there's a break in the discussion and stuff to ask your questions. But we will get to them all, so encourage that. I don't think there's anything else. So one thing I do want to, before I turn it over to Dale, is I'm going to share my screen here and just remind everyone where this information is stored. That's the right one. See that, Ryan?
I do.
Okay, so this is our county website, and it's under the departments under land and water conservation. I wasn't going to go through the whole thing for you. Once you get to this section of the website, you can go up on this top left here, the county waterways, aquatic invasive species. You click on that. We've got a lot of good information here, but the second one down is the countywide lake study. Click on here, and this is where everything is housed in here. The first line is the operational strategy and plan. It's our county plan. If you want to read it, feel free. But the next one is the Oconto County All Lakes Summary. I've taken all these lakes that we have data collected for so far and compares them side by side. So it can be kind of interesting to see how your lake compares to the neighboring lake or any other lake in Oconto County that is completed so far. Then the Oconto County Lakes Project, that's that sheet that I think Dale Moore talked about in the beginning, that where we try to keep track and let everyone, you can look at that and see where the progress is on your lake. Then the last one is the individual county lake summary report, surveys, plans, and virtual meetings. This is the main one that it gets there. So when you get in here, you're going to see all these lakes that are and what process they're in. So I'm just looking to see if Chain Lake's on here yet, and it does not look like it. But your lake will be alphabetical order, and you'll have your summary on there, and then eventually you can see like some of these have draft final plans and then a draft plan. So once we start the process of writing the plan, it'll be on there as a draft that people, as comments are coming and going, can go on there and look at it. We'll update it every so often. One thing, if your neighbors or friends or whatever could not make the meeting tonight, if you look on the left-hand side here, there is the lake study virtual meeting recordings. If you go in there, it'll have all the meetings. You can see your Meet Your Scientist one still on there. We'll have planning one on there, so you can refer them to that to view it if they so choose. The lake surveys, I think yours is done, but if we'll still want to fill it out, we can add the link back on there. Yeah, that's mainly it on this one. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. Look, that should be pretty good. So again, go to this section of the website to find all your information, and still feel free to call any of us, that we can talk to you one-on-one. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Dale Moore and allow him to talk to you for a few minutes.
Thanks, Ken. Again, I'm Dale Moore with the UW Extension here in Oconto County, and working on this team effort. It's been a pleasure, and we're really excited tonight to be able to present the information to you. Ryan is going to be the main speaker, and then of course we're going to have the DNR biologist talking about the fish and that sort of thing. So I know you're all excited, but we're pretty much excited about how this all fits into the 60 plus lakes that have public access. So when we looked at this project starting out, we're looking at how can we best affect change overall in a larger scheme. But tonight we're just going to be focusing on your waterway with you, and the key here is that for you to give feedback as Ryan or is it Tammy on tonight as they go over some of the data about the water. Like if you're really concerned about something, this is the time to speak up. There's going to be a number of weeks afterwards that you're still going to be able to make some comments and say, hey, this is where we want to go. But ultimately, you're going to hear tonight that we would like to see a number of goals and some policies that you're willing to implement to make positive changes on the waterway if needed. So this is a great opportunity. And like Ken said, that I do see that the survey is not open anymore on the chain, but if we could get it open, it'd be great for you all to see the numbers. If you could all take the opportunity to fill out that survey. So we'll have to either work on that, but either way, we definitely want your comments tonight as well as in the coming weeks. So I appreciate that. And I'll take the opportunity then to turn it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Dale and Ken. Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Haney. I work with UW Stevens Point at the Center for Watershed Science and Education. We've partnered with DNR and Oconto County to bring this lake study project to you. And so I'll give you a little reorientation here to what the project involved and what our results are. And please feel free, unmute yourself and ask me questions anytime if you have something come up, or you can save it to the end. We'll have plenty of opportunity for discussion. Just want to say we also, in addition to Ken and Dale and myself, we have Claire, and shortly we'll have Brenda Nordine from the DNR online that will also be available for questions. We have Derek Thorne, who was the your area invasive species coordinator, and we will hopefully have one of the DNR fish biologists on here too. And so again, part of tonight is just to introduce you to some of the resources in your area and being able to ask some questions directly. So feel free if you have any questions. Let's see. So just to recap, the project, this project was started back in 2016 or so, when the county, as a result of their land and water management plan update for the county, they decided they wanted to assess the surface water in the county, all the lakes. There's almost 300 lakes or so in Oconto County. Almost 70 of those have public access. And so that being a major resource in Oconto, and obviously a major source of tourism in the economy, realized they didn't know much about most of those lakes. So they started this baseline assessment of the lakes, which is a 2-year process, and we'll get into that. That's really just kind of a quick snap in time. And then to kind of give that assessment some traction, they're also pairing comprehensive management plan with each of those lake studies. And so management plan is designed to be a living document. It's a clearinghouse of information about your lake. So all of this baseline information, in addition to any historical information we were able to find, all gets incorporated into this. And then that gets paired with the goals and objectives of the lake community there, coupled with the science and the regulations, I guess, that the state has. And so these management plans are increasingly required to seek grants for assistance on different lake projects, whether it be with dealing with invasive species or shoreline restorations or things like that, because there's a lot of competition for that resource. So these comprehensive management plans are really where a lot of that money is going. So again, the planning process involved a 2-year study. We did 2 summers, a fall, a spring, and a winter. So we captured 2 growing seasons and then a full season at the off season in addition to that. And so we're now on step 2 of the management plan development. And so part of that is presenting you the results of what we know here tonight, discussing some of these issues. If if you call them issues, I guess, just discussing the lake, what issues may exist, and what the data says about the lake, and then moving forward with that on establishing a plan going forward for the lake. Once we have a management plan that we're happy with, and I'll discuss that at the end about how we're going to make that happen. That plan then goes on file with the DNR and your local municipality, places like that. So all these different agencies involved with your lake know of a kind of a central repository for all the information there. Chapter 193 governs lake management plans in Wisconsin, and that mainly details all the required components going into that plan. So they really want a holistic view of the lake. Historically, a lot of lakes just kind of drilled in on whatever problem they were having, maybe invasive species or excessive weed growth or something like that. And so, again, the resources are really being doled out to the lakes that have covered all of these subjects and have a better understanding about how their lake functions. So in that, I will say I've already started a draft of your lake management plan. So basically, we have a format that we've developed as part of this project that obviously the county is familiar with, and they can quickly refer to with various lakes. But I've just done a big data dump of a lot of the figures you'll see here tonight, just summaries on a lot of the different topics that you saw there in that 193 listing. And so at the end of this project, or at the end of this meeting, I will start populating a little bit on some of the things we discussed and what I hear from you guys in the survey. And then you all will receive a draft of this plan to finish up and review, and we'll kind of take it back and forth as an iterative process to help you guys get a complete document. So with that, I'm going to just kind of start big and then drill in a little bit. It's important to appreciate the overall where your lake is in the grander scheme of things. A lot of these lakes most of these lakes in this area were created 10,000 years ago during the last glaciation, and they've been, quote, aging ever since. A lake is just a low spot in the landscape, if you will, and so as it is, things flow into it. Erosion, sediment, plants and animals die and fall into it, trees fall in, and so it's a very natural process for a lake to eventually fill up and maybe become a marsh someday and eventually terrestrial land, given long enough, barring any other major geologic events. And so that's really just a one-way street. That's the way the lakes age. And so what we do in and around the lake often tends to accelerate that process. So, but when we're looking at lake management, again, we're talking about a 10,000-year-old body of water here that has been around for quite some time and is responding to its inputs. And so management is really just kind of about affecting the things we have any control over, and maybe slowing down this process. But it's important to have a realistic expectation for your lake. And then just real quickly, this is pretty intuitive for most people, but some people have never thought about it. It's important to have a basic understanding of the water cycle when we're talking about lakes composed of water. So our source of water, if we start with precipitation, falls and hits the land surface, a certain portion of that precipitation flows over ground as surface runoff, and then some of that precipitation gets a chance to infiltrate into the ground and become groundwater. And those are both sources of water for your lake, for example. The differences between those sources, of course, is that whereas groundwater gets a chance to soak through the soil and bedrock, maybe accumulate minerals, filter out contaminants, and slowly but continuously feed your lake, surface runoff is episodic. It carries a lot of energy with it that can move sediment, move contaminants, things like that. So, of course, over time, we've our activities have tended to increase the surface runoff component and reduce the infiltration component. And so a lot of lake management and water qualities, you'll see in a theme here tonight is about ways to increase that infiltration. So what shapes a lake's character? We've talked about lake age, for example, lake type. In Wisconsin, we basically have seepage lakes and drainage lakes that are the two main types. And then we have got what we call shallow and deep lakes. And so these different categories really kind of can predict how the lake behaves when it comes to certain things, which we'll see. We also have the geology and the soil of the area. Again, things that we have no control over. They're going to be what they're going to be. We have seasonal environmental changes. So I always like to point out, our lakes spend part of the year ice covered, cut off from access to the atmospheric oxygen, for example. Lakes in Arkansas, Florida, places like that, that doesn't happen. So lakes in North Country, go through changes that you don't always see anywhere. And then land use practices within the watershed and, of course, near the water shore are all going to shape how your lake responds. So getting to some of the good stuff. Here's what we call bathymetric map. So this is a topo map of Chain Lake. The idea is to replace some of the old contour maps from the 40s, 50s, and 60s that we see online most of the time. This is done with sonar, so it's more of a continuous scan as opposed to the kind of the point and shoot methods that they made those old maps with. That said, it's pretty much like we would have expected. We've got the deep hole there in that larger southern portion of the lake. Ken had mentioned the survey, and if you're not familiar with it, I still encourage you to take it. The survey is what informs and documents the perspectives of folks around the lake. The results of the survey will be an appendix in your lake management plan, and so it's just an opportunity to kind of quantify the various perspectives at the lake, and then obviously to hear from people that can't otherwise participate. And so one of the questions in there, and I'll periodically have some of the results in here, but one of the questions in there is just what do you value most about Chain Lake? And obviously these are the things we want to keep in mind and preserve when we're looking at goals and objectives. So wildlife, clear water, the constant water level, peacefulness, swim, paddleboard, water ski, fish, and watch wildlife all in the same lake. Quiet, fishing, more wildlife, the beauty. It's a spring-fed lake, great view, water quality, limited recreational boating, and it's a deep lake and the fishery. So these are all important. Which, by the way, the survey, by the way, we had a great response. I think there were 36, 40 responses, which again in our business is a pretty good response. If you can get even 10% of your population, I guess, if you will, that's usually a pretty good representation. But again, there's still an opportunity to take that. You don't have to be obviously a homeowner at the lake to take that survey. Another question: what do you think are the biggest impacts to Chain Lake? And this was definitely a recurring theme in the survey results. But the excessive watercraft traffic, and unsafe operation. This is a very, very common theme across many of the lakes. And that's a tough one. Unfortunately, I can't answer that with my lab results, but we'll definitely discuss that tonight and discuss what some of the other lakes are doing about that. First topic, we'll talk about water quality. And again, some of our topics, if you remember, water quality, aquatic plants, habitat, watershed. So those are some of the things we're going to cover here tonight. And again, speak up if anyone has any questions, just interrupt. So we have a few, most of the basic water quality measurements we make, I always refer to as vital signs. So kind of like your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your heart rate, things like that. These are things we can monitor relatively easy in a lake, and any one measurement by itself doesn't really um, inform us a whole lot, but it's when you develop that baseline and then do ongoing monitoring where you can maybe start to see a trend one way or the other. So water clarity is a pretty simple one to test. You can see the picture there. We measure it with what's called a Secchi disc, and it's really you just lower that into the water until it disappears. And so it's somewhat objective but subjective, but again, it's the collection of measurements over time that start to inform us about one thing or another. So here's kind of a first look at some of the data we have for Chain Lake, which isn't a lot. We've got all the results I could find are limited to the 2-year study that we just completed, other than a couple handful of samples done back in the late 70s by I'm not sure who. And so that's really all we have to compare it to. It gives us a little something, but it's really hard to um, be confident about any trends based on those minimum samples. So part of this, I would encourage you to get involved with ongoing monitoring of your lake, doing some of those simple things like water clarity measuring and even some of the water sampling. There's programs with the DNR that will provide you the equipment and training to do that at no cost. And so we can talk about that more later if you like. Basically, water clarity was 8 to 16 feet during our study, which is considered very good. Um, and based on, seems pretty consistent with those samples from back in the 70s. Water temperature is another one we look at, and Chain Lake is a deep lake, and a deep versus shallow lake is determined by whether it develops stratification or not in the growing season. The significance of that stratification, as you can kind of see in this figure, is that you have warm water near the surface that's warmed in the summertime becomes warmer than the water at depth, where your groundwater and your springs are. And so warm water is more buoyant than cold water. And so what happens is that warmer water being, the top few feet being mixed by waves and activity and things like that becomes separated and cut off from that deeper water. And so that deeper water doesn't really have a chance to get reoxygenated throughout the growing season when that thermocline exists. And then if you move to the right, as you go into the fall, as surface temperatures cool off, the temperature of your surface water becomes similar to the temperature of the deep water. And when that happens, you get a homogeneity in the water column, and it's able to mix. And so that's an opportunity for that deep water to come and mix and get reoxygenated. That also has a tendency to bring up a lot of stuff with it, bottom sediments, a lot of nutrient bound up in muck, things like that. So it's a win-lose situation. And then you go down from there into winter. Again, our lakes freeze over. The primary effect of that is that access to that atmospheric oxygen is cut off for the water. In addition, in the winter, we don't have any plants growing that time of year. And so once the ice goes on, that lake has all the oxygen it's going to have for the winter, and it has to kind of make it through for the fish and folks to survive. And then again, as we reach spring, surface temperatures become similar, and we get another mixing event, which is called overturn. So each time we go out to take a sample, which is at the same location every time, usually right over the deepest spot of the lake, each time we go out, we measure temperature from the surface to the bottom. And each one of these colors is a different sampling event, and with our surface being across the top of the graph. And so here you can see that thermocline I was talking about. All those measurements on the right side are during the growing season. And so our surface water temperatures were between about, 65 and 80 degrees. The times we were there. And then you can see as we go down the first 10 feet or so, that temperature doesn't really change. That water in the top 10 feet is all mixed. It's about the same temperature. And then we hit that 15-foot mark, and all of a sudden our temperatures drop off to about 50 degrees, 45 degrees, and then they restabilize and continue at 50, 45 degrees, going down. And so that big S shape there, that's our thermocline, separating that surface water from the bottom water. We have two events, the light green line there on the left and the dark blue line there in the middle. Those are our overturn events. So that's spring and fall, when we were out there sampling, and we had the same temperature all the way down to the bottom. And again, that's what would classify Chain Lake as a deep lake as opposed to a shallow lake, like most of the lakes across the road there. Dissolved oxygen, of course, we talked a little bit about this, but this is necessary, obviously, for our fish and our critters. Oxygen gets into the water column through photosynthesis in our aquatic plants, but primarily through exchange with the atmosphere at the surface. And so just like temperature, each time we go out, we measure dissolved oxygen with depth. And again, we can see our stratification there, our thermocline. During the growing season, at the surface, we're between about 8 and 10 parts per million dissolved oxygen, which is considered saturated at those temperatures. And our dissolved oxygen stays relatively the same, again, until we get down to about 10 feet. And then when you look down at 25, 30 feet, our dissolved oxygen has gone down almost completely to zero. And that, again, that's during the growing season, that is water that's cut off from the surface and is not receiving oxygen. Right in the middle of the graph, we got a kind of a lighter blue line that's straight. That's our fall overturn event where it was mixing, and so we had constant dissolved oxygen with depth. And then the big thing we're seeing here is between about 10 and 20 feet, all those dissolved oxygen concentrations during the growing season, they all shoot up to over 14 right before they hit that thermocline. And that's indicative of algae blooms taking place at depth. So there's some algae hanging out around there, right around the thermocline, where a lot of those species like to be, and they're just kicking off oxygen. It's summertime, the water's warm, and they're blooming like crazy. And so we're getting a big hit of oxygen down there right above the thermocline, but you're not seeing it at shallow depths. Phosphorus and nitrogen are the two key nutrients we watch. Obviously, these things are necessary for life. We're all composed of phosphorus and nitrogen. We get in trouble, obviously, in the lakes when we start receiving too many nutrients that it's not really metabolism, but I always say the lake is able to metabolize a certain amount of phosphorus, is able to process a certain amount of phosphorus before it starts developing nuisance problems. So we have lots of sources of phosphorus. Most of them are very natural and we have no control over. So again, we've got soils and plants. We've got plants and animals dying and falling into the lake. We've got rainwater carrying erosion and carrying contaminants with it. And then so when we look at trying to reduce our nutrients, we really can only work on the things that we have any control over. So here we are again, pretty limited data on Chain Lake, other than the past 2 years there at the end. And so this is our phosphorus and chlorophyll A. I've got a typo there on chlorophyll, but chlorophyll A. And so chlorophyll A is an indirect measure of algae in the water column, basically. So we're looking at phosphorus here and algae. That red line across the top, that standard is 30. So that's the phosphorus standard. And that's where being a deep or shallow lake comes into play. As a deep lake, because of that stratification, Chain Lake effectively can, how we say, process less phosphorus than say a shallower lake or a lake with more flow through it. And so that standard is 30. For a lot of other lakes, it's 40 or something like that, still in the same neighborhood. So all that means is that once you start seeing phosphorus concentrations above 30, that's when you start to begin to see some nuisance problems come up. And so you can see in our results here, we had one one sample result that came out at 33. That was back in September of 2021. It was a Tuesday. I'm only out there on the weekdays, so may have been a busy weekend. Not sure, but that happens. And again, we've just got the two samples from back in the 70s to compare that to. Pretty consistent with those 70s level. Again, we cannot really determine trends from this. You'd have to continue your monitoring to see if this is moving in a positive or negative direction. The chlorophyll there on the right, the threshold for chlorophyll, if you will, on that right axis is 6. And so even though we kind of had a big hit of phosphorus in the one sample there, our algae concentrations at the surface, and that's where the sample is taken from, remain pretty low. Pollutants, another thing we look at, things like potassium, sodium, chloride. These are things that would naturally be occurring in your lake. So when we do see them, and particularly high levels of them, those are indications of some impacts from a number of different sources. But those concentrations were all relatively low in Chain Lake. Our watershed. So again, for those not familiar, a watershed is the area of land that is draining to your lake. So, if your lake were at the foot of a little valley here, the watershed would be that valley where that runoff can move towards your lake. So again, our lake is responding to its inputs. So if we want to start to affect any change in our lake, one of the things we need to know is what is the area of land that's contributing to our lake. And so that was delineated here. The watershed for Chain Lake is about 370 acres, which relative to a lot of lakes is small, a small watershed, which is oftentimes good. That's less different land uses to impact your lake in a small area that you have to work with. Most of that watershed is in forest. We've got a little bit of development out there near the highway. Other than that, the other big chunk is the lake itself, and so not a whole lot in the watershed to target in those terms. But again, it's good to know what area of land is affecting your lake. The black arrows there is the direction of groundwater movement in the area. So slowly moving towards the Green Bay overall. The phosphorus loading there is when we model the land uses for potential sources of phosphorus. You're an 80% forest, so needless to say, the biggest chunk of phosphorus is coming from that forest land. Habitat, shoreline and near shore. So this is a big part of discussion in any lake management is the shoreline zone. And it's really the most sensitive and the highest. It's the hot spot in any lake, and so not as much happens out there in deep water when you start to lose your vegetation. Most of the action happens near shore. That's where all your structure is, whether it be your coarse woody structure or your aquatic plants. There's a lot of things that move onshore and offshore, and of course that's where we like to be as lake residents too. And so it's just about finding a symbiotic relationship so that everyone along the shoreline there is happy. So here's what I was talking about. The littoral zone is what is the area of the lake where we have that aquatic plant structure, and then in a deep lake such as yours, we get to a certain depth where the water clarity no longer allows for plant growth, and so we've got a limnatic zone out there at some point where there are predator fish moving around and stuff, but not a whole lot of action going on out there. Just wanted to touch base with the shoreline zoning ordinance. This is a statewide ordinance in Wisconsin, established back in the 1960s, actually, and it applies to any shoreline property that's not in an incorporated area. It's lengthy document, very, very, very technical. I like to just look on that figure on the right there, which basically shows the intent of the ordinance, is that that you have a good unmowed buffer of vegetation along the edge of the lake. Again, just to kind of protect that habitat, act as a silt fence for that 370 acres of wetland flowing to the lake. And the ordinance allows for, allows for access to the lake, allows for clear vegetation for access to the lake, a pier, view shed, things like that. But so it kind of sets some standards on that. And so this is how we've mapped out the results of that shoreline survey. And like everything else, that the intent of this really is to document current conditions so that we can monitor and measure change over time. And so you can also really quickly see that we've got quite a few sections of some pretty heavily developed shoreline in the red, and then some nice bays and areas of undeveloped shoreline too. For example, the day we're there, 88 piers were counted. There were 20 non-conforming buildings, so buildings within that 35 feet of the shoreland. Some beach, some riprap overall. The coarse woody habitat, and so that by definition is woody structure in the water that's over 6 inches in diameter. So Christmas trees, things like that, they're okay for a short time, but it's that coarser structure that's really necessary for a good habitat. So that was measured at a rate of 76 logs per mile in Shane Lake, which is pretty good compared to a lot of lakes in the study, but compared to, say, a pristine lake in this area, 250 to 500 logs a mile would be considered healthy and very good. So 19% of the shoreline was disturbed, which is actually less disturbance if everyone on the lake were in compliance with NR 115. That would allow 27% of the shoreline disturbance, but you're only at 19, so you're looking good here, but always room for improvement. Just like to throw this out here for some folks, just that shoreline restoration can be a number of things. I encourage you to be creative with it. It doesn't have to be letting your shoreline go to jungle. It can be very intentional, can look really nice. There's the county can even come out and discuss options with you, give you ideas, and there's a lot of cost share available for this. Also want to give a plug for native plants when it comes to that restoration. This is an interesting figure here, but it's a drawing, but it's a scale drawing of various native plants in northern Wisconsin here. Don't ask me to name them. I see a couple I recognize, but the point of this is that the native plants are they're designed for this area and this climate. They have really deep root zones, so they stabilize, they prevent erosion, they extract nutrients and contaminants moving towards the lake. They have that silt fence action, basically, as I talked about. In comparison, that red box on the far left side, that's Kentucky bluegrass. So that's your typical lawn compared to a native plant structure. Other ways to increase infiltration. It doesn't necessarily have to happen right on the shoreline. Rain gardens, retention basins, rain catchment. Obviously, where you collect your water off your roof and then use it at drier times to water plants. Maybe it's something simple as meandering your pathway to the lake, so you don't have that straight shot for runoff. Ken's department, the Land Conservation Department, spends a lot of time working with producers in the area, working with best management practices, cover crops, things like that. And then also, say with highway departments, and again, just being creative in how we manage our runoff and our stormwater without directly impacting surface water if possible. Aquatic plants. So this is another chapter in our book here. And again, we have a way of assessing and characterizing the aquatic plants so that we can monitor change over time. I always say a good plant person can tell you more about the health of your lake than all my lab results, just based on what types of plants they're seeing and what assemblage of plants they're seeing. And so So this is a plant survey that is done in a way that it's repeatable. It's called a point intercept survey, and it's it allows you to run statistics on the results, and then again, it's something that can be duplicated in the future to look at change. So each one of these points here on the lake has a GPS coordinate, and when we do the survey, we go out on a boat and we navigate to each one of these points. And when we get there, we drop a rake down. Looks a lot like a garden rake, and pull it up, and we see what's on the rake. And we inventory what various species are on the lake, and the abundance of plant material on the lake. And then we can use that data to start mapping different things. There were 291 points on Chain Lake. A series of white points there were places where there was no plant growth on the lake, or on the rake, should I say. So deep water. So here's our first figure. It's called rake fullness. There's that picture on the right there, kind of shows you what I mean with rake fullness. So there's our modified garden rake that we drop down, and when we pull it up, the first thing we do is we give it a 0, a 1, or 2, or a 3, depending on how much plant material is on that rake. And so here's the results of that. Our red dots are the 3s that we got, down to the green dots with a 1. And where there's not a dot, nothing came up on the rake in that location. And so we can quickly see what a distribution of our overall plant abundance is here. If you spend any time cruising around the lake, this is probably no surprise to you. 3/4 of our sites that we visited had vegetation at them back in 2021. There were 23 different plant species identified during the survey. And down there on the bottom left is a graph that shows where Chain Lake placed in terms of number of species compared to the other lakes in the survey. In general, more plant species means more diversity, and that typically means a more robust, healthy plant population. 23 species is pretty good. That put Chain Lake in the upper third of lakes in this study so far, in terms of diversity. I'll also point out there on the right, the C value in that column there on the chart there. C value is the coefficient of conservatism. So each species is given a rank between 0 and 10 on its combination of things. It's basically its sensitivity to disturbance, and kind of with that, its rarity, things like that. And so a higher C value is considered a higher value species because it's more sensitive and harder to find. And then we would give an invasive species a 0, then, for example. So the 3 most abundant species observed at Chain Lake were northern water milfoil, slender naiad, and fern pondweed. Northern water milfoil is not to be confused, obviously, with the Eurasian water milfoil, which is the invasive species we hear so much about. Northern water milfoil is a native plant. Looks a lot like Eurasian, can be mistaken. Mainly it's the number of needles there on each of those leaves that separates the invasive Eurasian from the northern water milfoil. So each of the species was found at about a quarter of the sites, and so you can see the distribution there of the northern water milfoil. There's the slender naiad, mainly in those north bays, and then our fern pondweed. The only invasive species documented in Chain Lake so far, the banded mystery snail and the rusty crayfish. As they say, if you got to have an invasive species, these are some of the ones to have. We don't know a lot about the banded mystery snails and the Chinese mystery snails. They certainly displace, native snails, but there hasn't been a lot of severe problems documented with them. Rusty crayfish can be a problem. They like to clip off plant tops, which sounds nice at first when you're boating, but the thing about aquatic plants is that they're consuming nutrients and kicking off oxygen. And so if we start to get rid of our plants, then we start to develop excessive nutrients, and we result in more algae blooms, things like that. So the rusty crayfish are not something to have, but they don't often become a problem in a lot of things. One of our final chapters here, recreation. So there's no wake between 5 p.m. and 10 a.m. on Chain Lake, and the boat landing is owned by the town of Lakewood. There's a chart there, just one of the questions, do you like the no wake rules as they are? About 3/4 of the responses did like the way they are, and then we had maybe 10 or so people not really liking the ones. When I did read the comments following that a lot, most of the folks that did not like the rake rules sounded like they wanted them more restrictive as opposed to being less restrictive, as we often see when someone doesn't like the wake rules. So just a couple last questions here off the survey. What should be done to restore, maintain, or improve Chain Lake? So again, here we've got the boating as being a problem, and some discussion on what it would take to make a Chain Lake a no wake lake. Fish stocking and spawning areas, and so to see what our fishery, what shape our fishery is in here. Any additional comments? Excessive boating and jet skiing again. So that's what I have. Ken, do we have Chip tonight?
I was just checking. I did not see him on here before.
Yeah.
I don't know where he is.
Okay.
I do not see him on there.
Okay. We don't have any current fishery data for Chain Lake. I contacted Chip Long, the fisheries biologist, to see if what he might be able to dig out of the files and find for us to inform us on that. If we don't hear from him tonight, I will populate that information into the draft plan when I make it. So with that, I guess I'd like to hear any questions or comments any folks might have. That was just in a nutshell the results of the 2-year study. The summary report that will soon be available online, I don't think Ken saw it on there tonight, basically contains that information in mostly just in figures. Your lake management plan will have a whole lot more discussion on a lot of that data, what the implications are of some of that data, and how one might interpret it. So I encourage you to check out the county website. Again, all the other lake reports in there are there. Lake management plans, you can see what some of the other folks have been up to, particularly if it's a lake you're familiar with. I think about nearby Maiden Lake. That was like in our first year. I think we did that back in 2016. So it's been a long time getting around to you guys. But any questions or comments from folks for any of us? Again, we've got a few resources listening in here.
I guess this is Ken Delata for the Chain Lake people. I see you guys have an association. Is it a fairly active association, or can anyone comment on that?
This is Natalie Dovey. We have one association meeting per year. I don't quote me on what the participation rate is across the lake. I would say maybe possibly half of the residents on the lake participate in that association. And we collect dues to support things like fish stocking, towards the lake.
Sure.
When-
So one of the things, and the reason I bring that up is when you have an association, the information train, if you want to call it,
Mhm.
you guys got a good start on it. But what a lot of them do is they'll take this to I'm assuming you have your annual meeting is probably what you hold in the spring here and.
Yes, Memorial Weekend.
Yep. So it's a great time to bring this out and say, hey, here's our opportunity. What's the opinions, on you can go through the chapters or whatever, the goals, that Ryan sets the basic ones, but what do you guys want to see? And it's a good way to get the support of, even if it's 50% of the lake, it's better than just a couple people saying, that we don't want bigger boats on there or something, but it's a good way to do it. And some of your goals can be, if you feel you want more participation around the lake association, one of your goals is how can we get more people coming to the meetings and stuff. So just things to think about as an association.
Mhm. When you mentioned a lake plan or a draft of the lake plan, when will that be available on the website for more information about like proposals for path forward?
Sure, yeah, I'll be drafting that. I mean, like I say, I've already kind of started the data dump into the document. And so after tonight, I'll just start populating that based on reading through the survey and listening to this meeting. So in the next couple weeks, probably. Usually the way we'll do it is we'll have a draft posted online, obviously, like Ken said, but we'll also, everyone here tonight, we have their email address for participating. And so I will send out a draft to this entire email list, really, so that each person can get a chance to look at it. And then some groups, form a committee to kind of go over it. Some we can, I'll also field questions and comments just from individuals. If you guys want to take your Word document and run with it and finish it, you're welcome to. Otherwise, you can discuss it and respond to me with changes you would like to see, and we can kind of go back and forth iteratively that way with different versions until you guys have something you're happy with.
Okay, I think the other piece would certainly be interested in having for that upcoming association meeting would be the fish report. There's
Yeah, absolutely.
several folks interested in that, and we do contribute money. We set money aside with our association towards the fish stocking, and I think would be interested in what recommendations or observations would go along with any decisions we'd make to either renew or change our fish stocking program.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sorry Chip couldn't be here tonight, but we'll get that information in there for sure.
Thank you.
And I'm assuming you're currently working with Chip on your fish stocking?
I believe so. I know we have somebody who has been working directly with the fish stocking. And I'm pretty sure he's working directly with Chip, so.
Yeah. So we should be able to get them reports from Chip and, like I say, get them out to you.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
just like everything else, yeah, just like that to kind of capture the history of the management in the lake, where things are currently, and then what you guys, how you'd like to proceed. So good. Okay.
I just have a question. Could you go back to the slide with where you had the chlorophyll, where you talked about where the source was coming from? I think it was the woods or the forest area.
Oh, yeah. Is it this one? Oh, yeah. Was it this figure?
I think so. I think
Okay.
so. And
This
just
is
so
yeah, go ahead.
it seemed like, and you don't need to go back to the other chart, but the chart showed that we were, I guess, below or favorable to, the levels that you would like to see in the lake. So I
Yeah.
think that was positive. And
Yes.
if so, obviously maintaining that is, I think, important to everyone. At least I would think it would be. So
Sure.
as you talked about that forest area, is there any thing that we can or should be considering to either keep the lake as good as it is as it relates to the runoff from that forest area, or any other areas of concern for a lake of our type?
Yeah. So this scale of look, if you will, at the watershed, obviously you could drill in parcel by parcel and see what's going on, but this is just a very generalized land use here. and just kind of as a coarse filter to try and look at what areas you might target if you did want to make some improvements to that phosphorus loading. And so I point out that this is woods, just kind of pointing out that in general, I wouldn't target woods for any changes. That's a natural habitat. Any land use is going to export phosphorus. So it's just how much. So obviously, you hear a lot about agricultural land. You don't have any tilled land in your watershed, but tilled land, exports phosphorus orders of magnitude beyond what forest does or something like this. And so, even though 95% of your phosphorus is coming from woods, that's not something that is significant or that I would target. Really, you've got just and development along the shoreline is probably the most development that's in your entire watershed. So really, it's that shoreline habitat that would probably be your best target. But yes, like you said, your numbers on that are good. We had one phosphorus concentration above the 30. Now again, that sometimes depends on what day we're out there or what weekend came before that. And so I would still look at this data as really just a handful of samples, and definitely encourage you to continue this monitoring. But this baseline data looks very favorable that Chain Lake is doing pretty good in terms of that. I don't see anything concerning.
I think to emphasize some of the stuff that Ryan was saying on that is, your development and some of the stuff we see now when they're not supposed to be doing it, but when you get new construction and not, runoff from disturbed ground on new construction has been a issue we've been seeing in the county, and they're supposed to be following best management practices. Doesn't always happen.
Right.
We do move in if something's being wrong and it gets reported and make them do it, but they can have some bad impacts in a short time if it's not being done properly. And the same with, I'm assuming that's probably National Forest, a lot of that stuff there, or if it is, they they're supposed to be using best management practice too when they go in and log or do stuff. So not a lot you can do in there, but they're supposed to be working to try and minimize any runoff from their part. But just a couple things there.
Yeah, there's definitely, along with those best management practices, there are best management practices for living next to the water and things like that. So those are kind of all the things I'll suggest in your draft plan that you can start to look at, just options that you can decide upon, really. Yeah.
So part of the lake is on city sewer and part is on part have septic. But based on some of your comments, it sounds like that would not necessarily having the rest on sewer would not necessarily have that big of an impact based on some of the other items you cited that would have an impact, correct?
Yes, I guess I would cautiously say correct. Obviously, you do have that South Bay is there's a lot of lots on that bay. So there's a lot of I'm not sure what sections are on sanitary, and that reminds me that I was going to ask a question about that because at least a couple people in the survey said they didn't have septic systems, so I assumed that's what was going on. So based on what we're seeing and based on the limited data, I would say that in general, you don't seem to have a big problem with excessive nutrients, and also with those some of those contaminants, fluoride, things like that. Those levels are all pretty low. There's nothing to suggest that septics are a problem on the lake right now. I'll also point out something else here, if I can go back to this watershed. So we have this watershed figure basically talks about surface runoff. So this is this high energy surface runoff component that is active on this watershed. But there's also things coming to your lake through groundwater, and the groundwater is again those black arrows, and so the groundwater is moving to the southeast. And if I recall right, most of your the biggest developed section is on that east side of the lake, and on that side of the lake, for the most part, groundwater is moving away from the lake, and so the septic systems on that side aren't likely. And again, I say this cautiously. This is just generally speaking, but the septic systems on that side aren't greatly impacting the lake because they're that septic discharge is running into the groundwater and flowing southeast away from your lake. So fortunately, your most of your undeveloped areas are up gradient of your lake, which is a good thing. You couldn't have designed it better.
Yeah, the sewer's on the east side of the lake.
Okay.
So when trees fall in the water on the shoreline, do you prefer that we just leave them, or do we remove them?
No, ideally is to leave them. Obviously, nobody wants a navigational hazard, but that core structure is key, primarily for the fishery more than anything else, but also the turtles, the whole food chain there likes that. If the fish biologist were on today, he'd be harping on the coarse habitat. That's the number one thing, other than the unmowed vegetation we talked about. Fish sticks, as they call them, where they actually take those whole trees and place them in the water, is probably one of Chip's favorite fish habitat things to work on. He sees those as very effective. When you do them intentionally that way, and again, that's something that Chip can help you arrange, where they come in and place some of those fish sticks. So instead of a tree coming down wherever that may or may not be agreeable, you can place those fish sticks on certain areas of the lake that people can agree on, and then they're anchored in place and stuff so they don't float away, things like that. But in general, yes, the more woody structure you can leave in the water, the better for the overall habitat.
This is Ken again. I'll just leave a little tidbit with that, with the fish sticks. In the past, we've done them on lakes up there. We actually have a cost sharing program that will pay 70% up to $2,500. One-time deal on installing fish sticks on your lake. It's a pretty simple process. I think it's a $50 permit through DNR, and then it's good for 5 years to keep adding if you want. And in the past with Chip, I can't speak for them now, but they will actually come out and help, and they'll do help with the anchoring in the springtime is when you anchor them and stuff to the shore and that. So the hardest part with this is finding the live trees to put in there. But so we do help with that. If your club's interested in trying to do them, you can either talk to Chip or myself or whatever, and we can start a process on that if you want to in the future ever do that. So
Yeah,
the fish.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The fish sticks are different than the cribs we did, right? Because we've had 2 rounds of crib building where we built cribs on the ice and let them sink into the lake. But you're talking about something that's connected to the shoreline, correct?
correct.
Yeah.
You get way
Yeah.
more. Oh, go ahead. Right.
Sorry, I was going to say, in that littoral area, in that near shore area, which is where they're most effective. Fish use those cribs for hiding and stuff like that, but they're not generally spawning out there. They're spawning in that shallower area, and so if it's those cribs have gotten pretty notorious too for the fishermen learning exactly where they are and just parking over top of them. I mean, all that structure is helpful. Chip has some great diagrams on the fish sticks, and so look in your draft plan for some of that. As Ken said, the hardest part can be finding the material. It's not really practical to truck whole trees across the county, so they're usually looking for shoreline property where they don't have to drag it too far. You guys obviously have got a lot of woods around your lake, so if you identify property owners that need a tree removed or something like that, if that can be coordinated with a fish stick project, that works out really well.
Yeah, I can. I don't know if you know anyone on Paya Lake. It's probably been 5 years ago now or so that we did a project out there, and they basically, the association went around and talked to everyone on the lake and say, hey, do you got a tree you want removed from your yard? And they would cut them down and then haul them out in the winter time and stuff. So they ended up with probably 20 fish sticks. We did 100, probably 100 trees. And that, so in that case, it worked out really well. And someone had a tree they wanted down, they got a tree cut for free and hauled out of there. So just an idea that has worked in the past.
Right, good way to use some grant money to get that tree down that's been shedding all over your roof. Anything else from anyone? It doesn't have to be tonight. Again, if something occurs to you or you just like to speak privately, give any one of us a call. Ken doesn't have all the answers, but he can usually find them. So
Thank you very much.
all right, thank you, folks. A great group here tonight. This is a bigger group than we've had on a lot of even our bigger lakes. So I appreciate your participation, and overall, I think you guys are in good shape. So I think your plan is going to be really about preserving what you got.
Have a good night.
All right,
Yeah.
thank
Ryan-
you, folks. Yes,
Ryan,
sir.
can you and Sarah stay on for a few minutes after
Yep,
this?
you
Once
bet.
everyone leaves? Thanks. You probably quit recording now. I don't know who's controlling that, Sarah or Ryan.
Oh yeah.